Hello, I'm Scott Sanders, the City Manager of Des Moines, Iowa. Thank you for taking the time to learn about our city budget and its processes. The engagement that we receive from you and other Des Moines residents is important for developing a budget that best serves our entire community. The feedback that you provide directly shapes the recommended budget that I will give to the council each year. After watching this video presentation, I highly encourage you to stay involved in the budget process. Visit our website, dsm.city/budget, to submit any questions and provide us with feedback. I'm really proud of our finance department and the work they do to ensure that we remain a fiscally responsible city and that we are being good stewards of the taxpayer dollars. We've been recognized for 45 consecutive years by the Government Finance Officers Association for our excellence in financial reporting, and we have a high bond rating that puts us in a competitive advantage against our other cities of similar size. Despite the recent challenges we've seen nationally in the form of inflation and rising costs, we are prepared to weather the storm without any increase to our levy. In fact, we have been able to accomplish a great amount of things just in this recent year. We launched a new, completely free summer camp for our youth as part of our Parks and Rec Department's equity-based service program. We solidified a partnership with Broadlawns Medical Center to place mental health professionals in our police dispatch to better help people directly in crisis. We completed a stormwater master plan to identify weaknesses in our stormwater infrastructure throughout the entire city in an effort to protect our residents from flash flooding. And those are just a couple examples of what we've done recently within our budgets. Now, to talk about our city process within the budget, I'd like to introduce you to Nick Shull, our finance director.
Thanks, Scott. I will be covering the budget process and overview over the next several minutes. That includes multiple topics: the budget process and forecasting that we do each year, the budget schedule that we have for the upcoming fiscal year of 2025, fund structure that the city has, and a budget overview that will cover the activity within our general fund and our capital improvement program. Lastly, we'll discuss our local option, sales and service tax. Now, you can get additional information on these topics and more at dsm.city/budget. Let's get into our first topic: budget process and forecasting. This approach is done every year. The city manager will instruct department directors of possible factors that could change levels of service based off of city council strategic priorities. Those departmental requests are submitted to a budget review committee that consists of city manager staff, human resources director, and myself, the finance director. That committee will meet with the departments and the city manager during September through January timeframe to determine the effects on the operating budget and the capital improvement program. In addition to that process, the city manager's office and the finance department solicit public input via listening posts and things like this video. If you would like to submit questions or feedback, please do so at dsm.city/budget. The third item is, starting in July, the finance department begins to compile salary projections and other models to look at historical data on expenditures and revenues. That helps us look at inflation factors and what the different costs may be for different projects. All three of those items are put together for the city manager's recommended budget that gets presented to the council in a workshop, usually in February. Then the council will hold public hearings in the March-April timeframe, which will allow us to submit the budget to the state by the required April 30th deadline. Getting into our current budget schedule for fiscal year 2025. That was kicked off at a council workshop on October 23rd. We discussed a budget timeline, and it was determined that we would have 4 listening posts, 1 in each ward. Those were scheduled and held between December 9th and December 16th. February 5th, we plan to release our preliminary budget and CIP books. after which we plan to have either a workshop or multiple workshops the week of February 19th to discuss those books. Starting March 5th and going through April 15th, the Council will have 4 different actions of approving a notice and holding public hearing on a new budget property tax notice and the budget itself. Those hearings will be on April 1st and April 15th. That will allow the city to submit the approved budget to Polk County before the deadline of April 30th. For those that prefer more visual in nature, this next slide demonstrates how that timeline looks from the beginning of October 23rd through the end of April 30th. To go into government accounting or fund structure, let's go specifically into what is fund. Funds are groupings of accounts that are maintained to ensure we're in compliance over what resources we are collecting and expending for different activities within the government. The city, just like state, county, and other local governments, we use fund accounting. That ensures compliance with financial rules as well as state and federal regulations. Now, if we look at specific funds that the city has, we primarily use a general fund that talks about the activities like police, fire, parks, and multiple administrative services that we have. Some examples of that is the city manager's office, IT, finance, and human resource activities. Now, going from that fund, we are going to do more broader activities like in the capital projects. Those are capital projects that account for acquisition and construction of multi-year assets. Those are things like streets, parks, that you're going to get multiple years out of whatever we acquire or construct for infrastructure. Moving on to our enterprise funds, we run those like a business and are primarily financed by program or user fees for that service that is provided. Some good examples of that fund type are sanitary sewer and stormwater utility funds. Now, a unique fund type in government is a special revenue fund. Those accounts come from a very specific source and can only be used for very specific purposes. Some examples of that type of fund are our local option, sales and service tax, and our road use tax fund. Now, another unique one is our internal service funds that are very similar to enterprise funds, except the services that they provide are to other departments within the city. A great example of that fund type is our fleet division that purchases and services vehicles for the other departments within the city. The last fund I'd like to discuss is our debt service fund. It is the account that we use to pay principal and interest of long-term debt that we issue for capital projects that we discussed above. To start our discussion on the budget overview, we're going to look at general fund revenues. As you can see from this chart, our source of funds for fiscal year 2024 primarily come from property taxes. Now, I will go into more detail on property taxes, the assessment cycle, and different taxable valuation and assessed values in future slides. If we look at the next largest that we have, are fees and charges for services. Those are across most of the city, and some examples that we have are the ambulance costs that we bill for, as well as park shelter rentals. If we go into the next largest area, we have franchise fees. Those are the fees on gas and electric bills. Then let's go into hotel motel tax. That's the 7% tax on hotel rentals that are out there. The city only retains 3% of those revenues, whereas CVB and Bravo get 2% each. A unique revenue that the city has are intergovernmental revenues. Those are revenues that we receive from state, federal, or county governments. If we look at property taxes as an assessment cycle, this is something that is handled statewide. Those assessments involve a lot of series of events that take over 18 months from start to finish. If you look at your property assessment by Polk County, it is reassessed every 2 years, which are odd numbered years. So this upcoming budget for fiscal year 2025, it is a reassessment year, and that is for our fiscal year starting July 1, 2024 through June 30 of 2025. The assessment date is actually on 1/1/2023. So that is the valuation date that is looked at, and it takes a full 12 months to the end of the year in 2023 for those to be finalized and given to the taxing authorities to look at for their budget for this upcoming fiscal year 2025. That valuation for 1/1/2023 are for your payments on September of 2024 and March of 2025. Now, the site that the state has is in this presentation that you can link to look at all the series of events that are taking place during that 18-month time frame. As we look at the fiscal year 2024 property tax dollars that are paid in this current fiscal year, you can see that the Des Moines percentage is 38.5%, followed by the Des Moines Public Schools at just over 35% and Polk County just under 16%. Now we have other taxing entities of Broadlands, Dart, and DMAC, and a few other minor taxing entities. As we look at the property taxes specifically for the city, that is broken up as the regular tax levy of 19 cents for that dollar that provides for the overall basic government services. That goes into our general fund as we discussed earlier. The liability, property, and self-insurance is 1 cent of that provides for costs specifically related to city liability and insurance. Again, that goes into the general fund. The employee benefit levy of 12 cents of that dollar provides for employee benefits including FICA, IPERS, police and fire retirement, and other benefits. Those are special revenue funds. The last piece of the property taxes that go to the city is our debt service levy at 7 cents. That provides that debt service cost of principal and interest that are traditionally associated with the bonds that we issue for those capital improvement projects that we talked about earlier. As we look at the difference between assessed value, tax value, and tax bills, I have this example to show you the different values of assessed value of 100,000, 150,000, and 200,000. I will discuss this at the 100,000 mark, but you can easily use this chart to find out where your value of a house sits for this current fiscal year of FY 2024. So if you have an assessed value of $100,000, you are not taxed at that full 100,000. The state calculates every year something that's called a rollback. What that rollback does is applied to your assessed value, so you're only taxed on a certain percentage of that assessed value. In fiscal year 24, it was at 54.65%. So your taxable value on that house is $54,650. So the total tax rate would come to $2,357. The annual portion of that goes to the city is $908. If you equate that out to a monthly amount, that is $76. Again, you can use this chart to determine where you fall on this spectrum or determine how that calculation works for yourself. Looking at general fund expenses for fiscal year 2024, this pie chart shows our largest expense is personal services at 76%. That is our salary and benefits for our employees in the general fund. Contracted services covers both the CVB and Bravo payments of hotel motel tax, as well as to other entities that provide services to the city. When we look at these expenses in a different way and look at them by department, you can see that public safety represents 58% of the general fund budget, with police at 35 and fire at 23. Next, we have administrative services. Now, that is multiple departments that serve other departments and the city. Those include city clerk, city manager, finance, human resources, civil and human rights, information technology, legal, and mayor and council. We also have parks at 7, library at 5, development services and engineering at 3, and neighborhood services at 2. Now, when we look at the services provided with the general fund expenses, they are listed here. Looking at the other funds for operation, you'll see enterprise funds for sanitary sewer, stormwater, solid waste, and parking, as well as within our special revenue funds, local option, road use, community development block grants, urban renewal, and also in our internal service funds, we have equipment maintenance and forestry. The services that are provided under those other funds are listed here. Continuing our budget overview discussion with CIP expenditure plans, you can see the most recent approved plan has fiscal years 2023 through fiscal years 2027. Now, when you look at the expenses over the 5-year plan, you can see that there's a difference between our fiscal year 23 and any of the other years. One of the major components is what's called a carryover. Because the construction season and fiscal years don't line up, our fiscal year ends June 30th, which is in the middle of the construction season. So if those expenses are completed before June 30th, those expenses have to carry from one fiscal year to the next. If you look at the additional information that we have on our website, you can see the most recent approved plan that has the detailed projects within which fiscal years the anticipated expenses will go. When we look at the historical data on expenditures, you can see the trends that we've had from 2018 through 2020 in our tax supported was a steady increase to over $100 million. Now, the CIP plan that we have does show a spike in fiscal year 2024. I do want to point out that blue dot above the blue line is the difference between the approved budget and what is carryover from prior fiscal years not being done. As you can see, that spike in 24 is intended to come down more to a normal level around that $100 million mark. Now, when we look at our enterprise funds, you can see that it spiked in 2020, and we do have a very large carryover in 2023. Now, this one is going to change with updated projects in this next budget cycle from the completed citywide plan of stormwater. When we specifically look at the tax-supported expenditures by category, you can see half of those projects deal with street improvements. The next largest component is our municipal buildings. Those municipal buildings have things that relate to our animal shelter construction, as well as fire stations around the city, and also a armory replacement. The next largest investment that we have is parks and recreation. Those are investments in our parks themselves and also the different operations that they have. When we look at the tax-supported revenue sources, we refer to them as tax-supported because the biggest component that you see there is the general obligation bonds. Those general obligation bonds are issued to pay for those projects, and those payback on the principal and interest is levied within that debt service fund. You can see a bunch of different funding sources that we have, whether it's one-time sources like ARPA, as well as federal, gaming, local option, private funding, and some of the enterprise funds towards those tax-supported projects. Now, to get a full list of what funds which projects, you will have to go back and look at the CIP document that was approved by Council on April of 2023. The last topic I will cover is local option, sales, and service tax. We will be going over the expenditures that happened during fiscal year 2023. The full report is available at dsm.city/local option. The full report has multiple years of activity as well as gives additional detail to the programs that we will be discussing on the following slides. The first topic we have is property tax relief. We've accomplished that through a couple of different ways. First is a transfer that we do to the debt service fund. As we discussed earlier, our debt service fund pays for principal and interest on projects we've already issued the debt for. Also, we've made a contribution to our Neighborhood Finance Corporation, which in the past we used to issue bonds for. Also, we plan debt avoidance for part of the acquisition and improvements to 1200 Locust as a armory replacement. If you look at the property tax levy chart on this slide, it gives you the history from fiscal year 2016 through the CIP plan year of 2027. On this, you can see that passing local option in 2019 did immediate decrease to our property tax rate of 60 cents when it moved from 1724 down to 1664. And then in the following year, it decreased another 3 cents down to 1661 and has remained there through the current fiscal year of 2024. If you look, you can see the effect that local option had. The rates we would need would be above that blue area. In that first year, it was the difference of $1.02, and within this current fiscal year, it was a difference of $2.53. Now that's per each 1,000 of taxable valuation. Looking at our use of funds beyond the property tax relief, you can see it breaks out as neighborhood improvements at 51%, street improvements and flood prevention at 34%, and public safety improvements and expenditures at 15%. Looking at street improvements and flood prevention, you can see we invested $6 million in cash towards street improvements. The details of those streets are in that full sales tax report. The stormwater improvements deals with a loan that the general fund gave to the stormwater fund, and this is $1 million payback from local option to the general fund. The flood prevention property buyouts deals with properties that are in the floodplain, which currently sit at under 200 homes through this program. This is a unique program that allows us to allocate $400,000 a year, but if they don't have the opportunity to spend it, it's carried forward in that designated reserve from year to year as properties become available. Our next couple slides deal with neighborhood improvements. So I will quickly go through these programs, and if you would like additional information on these programs, please go to the detail on the local option sales tax report. We've given funds to InvestDSM and their special investment districts, the Improving Our Neighborhoods, or ION program, and that's another program that we have as a part of our designated reserve with the grant funding associated with that. We also have our neighborhood matching grants, the expanded libraries we've done, and broadband permitting costs. Also, we've done some contribution towards the Reichart Community Recreation Center, enhanced tree care planting, equitable service neighborhood park programs, as well as additional park capital projects, park enhancements, neighborhood association grants, and sidewalk capital projects. We also did an investment with the Des Moines Public Schools food pantry out of local option, in addition to ARPA funding that we did. Public safety improvements and expenditures. We've got 4 different categories here. The firefighter positions. This was from originally a SAFER grant that ended in 2019. We were able to keep those firefighters after the grant ended with the funding of local option. Also, with the completion of Fire Station 11, we were able to add additional fire positions. These funds are able to cover 19 positions. The next topic we have is mobile mental health crisis services that we have with an association with Broadlawns. We have public safety dispatch and equity positions, also our police and fire equipment. This deals with our police sworn cameras as well as additional gear for our fire department. Lastly, we have our financial reserve. We will plan to try and keep about 15 to 20 million in the financial reserves to allow us to continue our local option programs given the fact that local option is a variable revenue source. If you have any questions, please go to dsm.city/budget and submit a question or feedback to us, or you can call us at 515-283-4921. Thanks, and I will hand it back over to Scott.
Well, thank you, Nick, for explaining to all of us how the budgets work at the city. I know that it takes an enormous amount of time to put together all the estimates for the services we provide, the costs that are associated with that. But we want to make sure we're actually providing the right services to our residents, and that's where you come in. As our residents, we want to keep you involved in the budget process. I strongly encourage you to visit our dsm.city/budget website and share your thoughts and priorities with us. We only know that we're providing the right services if you respond and participate. There's also that opportunity to come in person with our listening posts. Those will be in each of the wards. Those dates are provided on our website as well. So again, thank you for participating, and please stay involved.